Men and women all over the globe are joining now for the best videos on the internet.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
And I'm doing my part too.
They're doing their part. Are you? Click the subscribe button now to become a member of the Action Pack. Would you like to know more?
Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Mike. 2 magical fantasy games were released earlier this year, 2023. One was the very much so anticipated and hyped Hogwarts Legacy, and the other is the subject of today's video. This is Mike's After Action Reviews, and this is the After Action Review for Forspoken. Starting off with the game's production. Forspoken was released on January 24th, 2023. It was developed by Luminous Productions, who's most well known for Final Fantasy VII Remake from 2020, which is their only other game. It was published by Square Enix, who is most well known for Final Fantasy VII from 1997, and Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion from 2022. The music was by Bear McCreary, who's most well known for The Lord of the Rings of Power from 2022, and most recently did Foundation, a TV series from 2021 to present. And also Gary Shyman, who's most well known for BioShock from 2007, and most recently did Gypsy Rose Lisinski from 2022. Moving forward, let's talk about the game's story. The story of the game is quite similar to some of the previous games from Square Enix in the Final Fantasy series. You play as Frey Holland, a down-on-her-luck New Yorker who has had multiple run-ins with the law, but when she finds Cuff, a being trapped in the form of an armlet, Frey is transported to Athia, a magical world where she will be forced to battle mystical creatures and the corrupted leaders of the land, the Tantas. Frey was raised in the foster care system, having been abandoned by her parents as an infant. This has led her to have a little bit of a bad attitude, along with being street smart, immature, abrasive, and apathetic. These characteristics are very prevalent in her motivations and the game's dialogue, with Miss Holland being basically selfish and indifferent to the plight of Athia for most of the game. In fact, other than a story arc to avenge the death of another character that happens relatively early in the runtime, Frey, for the most part, is just trying to find a way home and is aggressively unmoved by the dire needs of the people around her unless those needs align with her own. This makes the character quite a bit unlikable and possibly unrelatable depending on the person playing. It is not until almost the end of the game that we see the development from jerk to hero that you may typically expect in a game's protagonist. This lack of gradual development, leading to a sudden change, will probably give players a bit of whiplash, almost like that wonderful ending of the hit series Game of Thrones. This is Frey's main character weakness and one of the biggest problems with the game. Cuff. The armlet that Frey wears serves as our protagonist's guide to the world of Athia and is the source of her magical powers. Cuff acts as a type of Jarvis character and even has a similar voice to the Stark-created AI. Another key aspect of the story is finding out the mystery behind how Cuff came to be trapped in the form of a piece of jewelry and how to remove him from Frey's arm. A lot has been said online about the dialogue interactions between Frey and other characters in the game, especially Cuff, and while many criticize this aspect of the game, I think the exact opposite. I certainly do not think that the dialogue is particularly inspired, but I'd say it is fine. I especially liked the interactions between Cuff and Frey. The two characters often playfully insult each other, while at the same time they are actually growing more attached to one another. The dialogue between these two characters was not amazing or anything, but it was quirky and interesting, and curiously, the dialogue, which is often called terrible, does a great job of showcasing our main characters' personalities, and how they aren't taking things as seriously as you might expect. Both Cuff and Frey are witty, but also immature, pessimistic, and generally uninterested. Forspoken is an open world game, and it feels mostly empty due to the fact that it actually is. There is only one quite small settlement that serves as your hub and is the only place with interactable NPCs. The basic breakdown of how you will play through this world goes like this. You will do a few missions leading up to a battle with one of the 4 main bosses. Most of these are a variation of fetch quests, by the way, with the main story lasting about 15 hours. There are 21 side missions called detours that you can complete. This will bring your playtime up to about 23 hours, but these as well are usually another form of fetch quest. The map itself suffers from Ubisoft syndrome, being full of marked optional side activities, such as finding chests, discovering monuments, and battling mutated versions of enemies, and that is just to name a few. You can do these to get various rewards, including gear, experience, and even stat increases. These will begin to feel totally repetitive as the game goes on. There are even towers that you can activate to reveal areas of the map and the activities within, drawing the comparison to Ubisoft games. And do note, by the way, that just following the game's story will leave much of the map undiscovered. 100% completing the game will take most people about 40 hours, so if you do the math, that means that the side content makes up 25 hours of the game time, close to double that of the game's story. Comparing that to other titles such as God of War, Ragnarok, and Ghost of Tsushima, each of which have 26-hour stories and 26 and 36 hours of side content respectively, makes it sound not so bad, until you realize that the side content in those games is much less repetitive and does a much better job of strengthening the connection that you have to their characters than we see here. So, now we will move on to the game's core gameplay mechanic, combat. The combat is where the game is actually quite competitive. The connection between Cuff and Frey gives her a wide variety of spells to use during combat throughout her journey. There are 4 types of magic available in the game, each of which basically corresponds to earth, fire, water,
Very nicely done.
All right, what's our next move?
and lightning. Each of the 4 magic types in the game not only have interesting and unique attacks, but also support spells that provide healing, bind enemies in place, and give you different buffs. These are just a few of the spells, but I'll leave the rest for you to discover yourself. Depending on your personal expectations of combat, there are 2 drawbacks to solely using magic to attack. For one, only 2 of the 12 attack spells in the game are melee attacks, and these operate using the triggers the same as your other attacks, which is a little bit odd because normally your melee attack is, square or X or something other than the triggers, and then when you switch into ranged mode, you use the triggers, so that's just a little bit odd. The second thing is that while there is dodging, there is no blocking in the game. Basically, this makes the game a third-person shooter with a dodge mechanic, rather than a Batman Arkham City style beat-em-up with an extensive magic system. One of the main characteristics of the game that you will be relying on heavily is the aforementioned dodge mechanic. On paper, the dodge mechanic in Forspoken seems like it would not be very fun because it would make the game too easy. But actually, developers pulled it off very well. It works like most games. As enemies attack, you hit the dodge button to dodge. The unique twist here is that your dodge and dash use the same button. Tapping the button makes you dodge, but if you hold it down and move, you will enter flow mode, which is basically an infinite dash mode, allowing Frey to automatically dodge enemies' attacks. She is unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it and how you want difficulty to be in the game, still affected by area effect attacks. The last, and probably the most important defensive ability to mention is your shield. When Frey takes fatal damage, Cuff will generate a shield that keeps her alive with just a small amount of health. This shield works on a cooldown. This basically means that if you take a fatal hit, you will survive, and then you can use flow to run around the battlefield until your shield comes off cooldown or you heal yourself. All of these abilities make movement, dashing, and dodging paramount in combat, while you will be attacking in between using these movement mechanics. Now we come to the last aspect of combat, the enemies. The enemies in Forspoken are an interesting topic. The bosses, there are 4 of them, and to a lesser extent, the mini-bosses scattered around the open world are anywhere from just okay to a pretty fun challenge. They use a combination of basic attacks that can be dodged using flow, and area of effect attacks that force you to constantly be moving around. It is the bosses and mini-bosses that truly allow you to see the full potential of the game's combat system. Then there are the basic enemies. The most common non-boss enemies in the game are just corrupted wildlife or weak and slow-moving zombies. These enemies feel like nuisance enemies, being easily beaten individually, but almost always appearing in groups means it will take you time to kill them all. There are humanoid enemies that are what you would think of as much closer to the average non-boss enemies in games, but these appear much less frequently and will also be in at least moderately sized groups in order to force you to utilize the game's mechanics to zip around the battlefield to avoid damage. So, let's move on to the game's special features. Each of the game's 4 magic types have their own skill trees. Each tree has a variety of spells for you to master. In the world of Athia, you will spend mana to learn new spells and level up existing ones. Mana is gained when leveling up, but interestingly, can be found seeping out of the ground all over the open world. And I mean that you can find mana everywhere. Being able to find mana just by running around the map could be a double-edged sword depending how you look at it. It makes progression easier, so Frey will be more powerful, but some players may find that it makes progression too easy. I can also see where some people may think this is a great choice by the developers because of the mana cost of some of the spells in the game, and it has an added bonus of incentivizing exploration. There is also gear in the game that you get as rewards for progressing through the main story, and can be found in chests throughout the world, with cloaks notably being found in labyrinths, which serve as mini dungeons with a mini boss at the end. Cloaks and necklaces serve as the game's armor. They offer buffs to health, defense, and your magic. Cloaks and necklaces can be upgraded using materials that you find around the world. Along with being able to upgrade its stats, you can also place up to 3 buffs onto a piece of equipment. These buffs can be crafted and swapped out at workbenches within refuges dotted around Athia. The last customization option you very interestingly get is that you can change Frey's nails. Each different nail polish design offers 2 buffs. I've never seen this in a game before and thought that it was a nice lore-friendly way to offer another layer of customization to a character that doesn't use any form of traditional weapons or armor. We have one last thing to talk about before we wrap things up. The movement abilities. The movement abilities showcased in the trailers for Forspoken before its release were one of the main things that piqued my interest about the game. Having said that, I have to say that I was honestly disappointed by the traversal elements in the final product. Everything that was shown in the promotional material is there, but it's just not as good as it seemed, and I think that I know why. Throughout the game, you get Flow, an infinite dash that allows you to move quickly, run up walls and parkour over objects, and auto-dodge enemy attacks. Zip shoots out a fiery tendril that acts like a grappling hook.
I wish I could have seen it.
Glide allows you to surf across the surface of water, and Scale activates a 4-jump combo using electrical charges to lift yourself higher and higher in the air. All of this sounds great, but the problem is the way that the world is designed. Much of Athia is wide open plains that do not offer you much in the way of parkour opportunities, like in games such as Spider-Man and the infamous series. Alright, now it is time for my final statement and review score. Forspoken is a game that has quite a bit of ambition, but I don't think that it lived up to it. The combat is unique, being able to use a great variety of magic while battling huge monsters and large groups of weaker enemies was fun. The traversal elements are great, but the mostly wide open spaces in the world don't complement this aspect of the game at all, and a lot of the time make you feel like you are actually moving quite slow even when you are dashing at high speeds. The fact that the map is so big but only has one settlement and a bunch of repetitive, uninteresting side activities is also a big hit to the game's final score. The biggest disappointment, though, was the story, and not in the way that you may think. The characters are either uninteresting or unlikable. The thing that really got me was that most of the story is told in the last few chapters. The thing is that when I got there, I was really interested in the story elements presented, and then the game ended. They had a great idea for the story that they wanted to tell, but they just, at least it seems to me anyway, that they just couldn't get it put together right. For that reason, I have to say that this game is average, and not even a thumbs up average. Sometimes games are average because, that's what they're shooting for. It's right as an average game. Here, it's painfully so, because it has some really good elements and some great potential in other elements, but it's just dragged down by all of the different problems that it has. So, that's all I've got today, guys. I do want to thank you all for watching and just say, God bless you all, and have a good day.